I had never been a fan of night shifts, but the extra pay was hard to ignore. The job itself was simple, monitoring a small security booth at the edge of town. It was a quiet area, mostly warehouses and storage units, with only a few late-night workers passing through. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. All I had to do was sit in the booth, watch the security cameras, and occasionally patrol the perimeter. The first few nights were uneventful. The monitors showed nothing but empty streets and dimly lit alleys. Sometimes a stray cat would wander by, or a delivery truck would pull into one of the warehouses. But on the fourth night, I noticed something strange. As I leaned back in my chair, trying to fight off the exhaustion creeping in, I glanced at the security monitors again. That's when I saw him. On the back camera, a man stood in the middle of the road, staring directly at the lens. He wasn't near any buildings, no parked cars around, just standing there, completely still. The streetlights cast long shadows, making it hard to see his features. But I could tell one thing for sure: he wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight. A strange unease settled in my chest as I watched, waiting for him to do something. But he just stood there, staring. I stared at the screen, expecting him to move, but he didn't. He just stood there, motionless. The grainy footage made it hard to see his face, but he seemed to be looking directly at the camera. After a few minutes, I checked the other cameras, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone. But when I looked back, he was gone. No sign of him walking away, no movement, just an empty street. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a drunk who had wandered too far. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped outside the booth, flashlight in hand, and scanned the area. The street was quiet, the only sound being the hum of distant traffic. No sign of the man. I locked the booth door when I went back inside, just in case. The next night, I found myself checking the cameras more often than usual. Hours passed without anything unusual, and I started to think I had overreacted. But at exactly 2 a.m., he was back. Same spot, same posture. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make out his features, but the poor lighting made it impossible. My pulse quickened as I flipped between the cameras. I wanted to see how he arrived, but none of the feeds showed him walking into frame. It was like he had just appeared. This time, I didn't go outside. I watched the screen, waiting for him to leave. After 5 minutes, I checked my phone, considering calling someone, maybe the police. When I looked up again, he was gone. By the fifth night, my nerves were shot. I had barely slept during the day, and I felt on edge the moment my shift started. I kept glancing at the monitor, waiting for 2 a.m. When the time came, he was there. But this time, he was closer. He had moved down the street, standing near the warehouse gates. I could almost make out his face now, but something about the way he stood made my skin crawl. I hesitated before reaching for the radio, considering calling the warehouse security team. But as I lifted it, the man moved. Not much, just a small shift in posture, like he was adjusting his stance. But it was enough to send a chill down my spine. He was aware of me watching. I kept my eyes on the screen, not daring to blink. Another minute passed, then another. Then, without warning, the screen went black. All the cameras shut off at once. A heavy silence filled the booth. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I reached for my flashlight, my hands shaking. The power had never gone out before. I checked the main switch. It was still on. Then, just as suddenly as they had turned off, the cameras flickered back to life. He was gone. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to breathe. I scanned every camera feed, but there was no sign of him. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer. Watching. Waiting. On the 6th night, I almost called in sick, but something in me needed to see it through. I arrived at my shift early, checking all the cameras and making sure everything was working properly. I even walked around the lot before the sun set, making sure I was familiar with every corner of the property. At 2 a.m., I braced myself. The monitor flickered, and there he was. But this time, he wasn't at the end of the street. He was standing just outside the security booth. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The camera showed him standing inches from the glass, his face obscured by the poor quality of the feed. But he wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking at me. I turned my head slowly, barely daring to move. The window beside me was dark, reflecting the dim light of the booth. I couldn't see outside, couldn't see if he was really there. Then, a sound, a soft tap against the glass. I jumped to my feet, knocking over my chair. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers barely working. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I whispered into the receiver. "There's someone outside my booth. He's been watching me for days." The operator asked for my location. I was halfway through explaining when I turned to the screen again. He was gone. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the entire lot, the surrounding streets, even checked the security footage. But there was nothing. No one had been recorded standing outside the booth. No one had been caught on any camera at all. I quit the job the next morning. I didn't care about the extra pay. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that place as possible. But sometimes, late at night, I still check my phone, scrolling through news articles from that town, looking for anything that might explain what happened. So far, I've found nothing. But I know what I saw, and I know deep down that I was never supposed to leave that night. Before moving to the second story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest uploads. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the story and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. I had worked the night shift at Turner's convenience store for about 4 months. It wasn't the best job, but it paid the bills, and I didn't have to deal with too many people. The town was small, and most nights were quiet. Drunks, truckers, and the occasional lost traveler were my only company. The store sat near the highway, surrounded by empty lots and old buildings. Across the street, a single streetlight flickered on and off, making everything feel a little more isolated. That night, something felt different. The air was heavier, the silence too deep. At first, I ignored it. Maybe I was just tired. I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone, keeping an eye on the empty parking lot. Then I noticed a car. A dark sedan parked across the road, engine off, lights off. Someone was inside, but they weren't moving. They had been sitting there for nearly an hour. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was nothing. People pulled over all the time. Maybe they were waiting for someone. But something about the stillness of the car made my skin crawl. I glanced at the security cameras. No one was inside the store except me. The small clock above the cigarettes read 1:43 a.m. 3 more hours until my shift ended. The doorbell chimed. I looked up as a man walked in, hoodie pulled over his head, hands in his pockets. He kept his head down, pretending to browse the aisles. A minute later, another man entered, doing the same thing. They didn't buy anything. They barely looked at the shelves. Instead, they stole quick glances at me. I stayed behind the counter, acting like I wasn't paying attention, but my gut told me otherwise. A woman rushed in next. She looked nervous, her breathing unsteady. She avoided eye contact and walked straight to the counter. "Can I use your phone?" Her voice was shaky. "My car broke down." I hesitated. Something was off. "Yeah, sure." I handed her the store phone. She dialed a number and spoke in hushed tones. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she kept glancing at the 2 men. Then, without another word, she hung up and walked out, disappearing into the night. The men exchanged glances. Then, the power cut out. The store went completely dark. except for the dim emergency lights near the entrance. The refrigerators hummed to a stop. The security monitors blinked off. My stomach tightened as I stood frozen behind the counter, gripping the edge. The automatic doors didn't open. The parking lot outside was still empty. The only sound was my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. "Hey man," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're having a power issue. If you need something, let me know before I have to close up for the night." No response. I reached under the counter where we kept a metal bat, my fingers brushing against the cold handle. My heart was racing. The emergency lights cast long shadows, making everything look distorted. The two men were still inside, but they weren't pretending to browse anymore. They were standing still now, both facing me. I swallowed hard. "You guys need something?" One of them stepped forward, still keeping his hands in his pockets. He was tall, built like someone who had been in fights before. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Empty the register." I exhaled slowly. So this was happening. I had thought about this scenario before. We weren't supposed to resist. Give them the cash, stay calm, and let them leave. That's what the training said. But something about this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. I nodded, keeping my movements slow. I opened the register, pulling out the cash. "Here," I said, placing the bills on the counter. "Take it and go." The second man took a step forward. "All of it." "This is all we keep in the till at night," I said, keeping my voice steady. The first man glanced at the door, then back at me. "Back room. You got a safe, right?" My hands clenched. "We don't keep cash in there." Liar. I knew then they weren't leaving without more. Maybe not even without hurting me. The one closest to me reached into his pocket. I saw the outline of something, maybe a knife, maybe a gun. My body tensed. That's when the front doorbell chimed again. Someone else had walked in. A man, middle-aged, dressed in a dark jacket. His face was unreadable. He didn't say a word. He just stood there looking at us. It was as if his presence had changed something. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He was just watching. The taller man shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want, old man?" The man didn't answer. He took a slow step forward, then another. The men exchanged glances. The air was thick with tension. "Let's go," the second man muttered. "Not worth it." "Shut up," the first one snapped. "We're already in." The man in the jacket kept walking, not toward me, not toward the robbers, just toward the back of the store, silent, unbothered. And then, just like that, the two men turned and ran. I stood there stunned as they bolted out the door and disappeared into the night. The dark sedan across the road revved to life and sped off. I turned to the man who had just saved me, my pulse still racing. "Thank you," I breathed. But he was already walking away, past the aisles, toward the back of the store. "Sir?" I called. "Who are you?" No answer. I moved around the counter, peering toward the back where he had gone. The emergency lights flickered, casting strange shadows along the floor. And then I stopped. The back door was locked, and the man was gone. I had never liked working the night shift, but I needed the money. Grayson's hardware store wasn't exactly a high-end place, but it paid decently, and the job was easy enough. Most nights I spent my time cleaning up, rearranging shelves, and watching the clock until sunrise. It was lonely work, but that night I would have given anything to be alone. My coworker Jake had called in sick, leaving me as the only one on duty. Our manager, Mr. Collins, didn't seem too concerned. "Slow nights, man," he had said. "You'll be fine." I wasn't so sure. The store sat at the edge of town, surrounded by empty lots and a dimly lit road that barely saw traffic after midnight. The moment I walked in at 10:45 p.m., something felt off. Maybe it was the flickering lights in aisle 7, or the faint hum of the security cameras that seemed to cut out for a second longer than usual. Either way, a deep unease settled in my chest, but I brushed it off. It was just another long night. By 12:30 a.m., I had finished stocking the shelves and was about to take my break when the automatic doors slid open. I looked up, expecting a late-night customer. No one was there, just the empty parking lot and the cold wind rattling against the glass. I hesitated, staring at the entrance. The motion sensors weren't faulty. I had tested them earlier. Something had triggered them. My skin prickled as I walked over, peering outside. The lot was deserted. A single streetlight flickered in the distance. The wind carried loose paper across the pavement, but beyond that, nothing. I stepped back inside and locked the doors manually. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I returned to the counter and glanced at the security monitors, my stomach twisted. A shadow moved near aisle 10. I froze. The store had been empty all night. I stared at the screen, but the figure had already slipped out of view. My hands went clammy as I grabbed the radio from the counter. Hello? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I reached under the counter and pulled out the metal bat we kept for security. My heart pounded as I walked toward aisle 10, my footsteps echoing against the tile. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. I reached the aisle and turned the corner. Nothing. The shelves were perfectly intact, the products undisturbed. I exhaled, gripping the bat tighter. Maybe I was overtired, seeing things. Just as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A single footprint on the floor. My blood ran cold. The floors had been spotless when I checked earlier. This wasn't mine. I took a step back, heart hammering. The footprint led toward the storage room at the back of the store. The door was closed, just as I had left it, but something felt different. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. Locked. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. I turned off the flashlight and listened. The store was silent, unnervingly so. Even the usual hum of the air conditioning seemed to have faded. Then, a noise, a faint, deliberate sound, a breath. I took a step back. My grip tightened on the bat. The security cameras. If someone was here, the cameras would have caught them. I turned and sprinted back to the counter, nearly slipping on the tile in my rush. My fingers fumbled as I pulled up the feeds. Static. The back aisle camera was out, just blackness on the screen. But for a split second, before it had cut out, I had seen something. A figure, standing in aisle 10. I whipped around, my chest heaving. Aisle 10 was empty. The phone. I grabbed it with shaking hands and dialed 911. The call rang once, twice. Then, a soft click. No voice. No operator. Just breathing. Slow. Heavy. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen, the dial tone humming in my ear. The store was silent. Too silent. Then a faint metallic clang echoed from the back. Someone was in here. I grabbed the bat and forced myself to move, every step calculated. I stayed low, scanning the aisles. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Then, footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the back of the store. I pressed myself against a shelf, my pulse hammering in my ears. The steps grew closer. Then they stopped, just around the corner. I held my breath. Then, in a single movement, I lunged, swinging the bat. It connected with something solid, a grunt of pain. A figure staggered back, gripping his arm. A man, dressed in black, tall, broad-shouldered. He had been watching me, waiting. I bolted toward the exit, but the doors wouldn't open. My eyes darted back to the man. He was pulling something from his pocket. My stomach dropped. A key card. My manager's key card. The one that locked and unlocked the doors. He had planned this. "You were alone tonight," he murmured. "They always leave one person alone." I didn't hesitate. I faked right, then darted left, sprinting toward the emergency exit. The alarm blared as I burst through the door into the freezing night air. I ran, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard footsteps stop. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, watching me. But he didn't follow. He simply stepped back inside, and the door swung shut. The police arrived 10 minutes later. I told them everything. The security footage corrupted. No proof of the key card. The manager swore no keys were missing. They never found the man. Grayson's hardware store shut down a month later. Low sales, they claimed. But I knew better. Someone had been watching, waiting, and next time, they wouldn't leave a witness.